Hello, my name is Philip Langdale, and I'm an engineer here at Cloudera, and I'm here to talk to you about Cloudera Manager 3.7, our latest release. In this demo, I'll be looking through the various service lifecycle management features of Cloudera Manager. Now, the first thing we need to do is we need to log into the product. And we're greeted with the main service summary screen. From here we can see what are all the services that are running on the cluster and a quick one-line summary of them. Are they running or are they stopped? What's their health status? What are the roles that make up those services? Now let's take a closer look at HDFS. So here's our HDFS summary page. We have some basic information about the service and about its health. Health and monitoring will be talked about in a separate demo, so I'm not going to go into that too closely here. Now, if we take a look at the top, there's a page marked configuration, and anybody who's had to deal with the Hadoop before knows configuration can be a pretty involved process. There are a lot of settings and switches and knobs that one can adjust, and it's often important to examine these and to change them to achieve sort of optimal performance from your cluster. Now, if we go down this list, you can see there are certainly plenty of these, and often it can be quite overwhelming when one has to consider all of them at once. So part of what Cloudera Manager offers is we try very hard to pick sensible values when you create a service for the first time. So rather than just relying on basic defaults, we'll actually look at the makeup of the cluster and the physical characteristics of the machines, and then try and pick values which make the most sense. So hopefully you don't need to come and get your hands dirty on this page straight away before you have a cluster that works pretty well. But of course, a time's going to come when a configuration change is going to need to be made, and you'll come here to do it. So let's say, for the sake of example, that we want to change the replication factor of the cluster. In this particular case, it's currently set to 2, and we might want to increase it to 3 so that we have additional data redundancy and increased robustness against hardware failure. So we come and click, and we can change that value to 3. And then we can come and click the Save Changes button to save those changes. But before we do that, I'm going to add an annotation so that we know what the change was and perhaps why I made it. With that done, I can click the Save Changes button. And the UI has now told me that the change has been saved, but also that I'm going to need to restart the service for the changes to actually take effect. This is the case with most Hadoop configuration changes. You'll need to restart the service, otherwise the change is simply queued up and doesn't take immediate effect. Now, you may decide that you can't restart immediately and navigate away from this page and go do other things. And so to avoid you losing track of the fact that a restart is required, we'll actually indicate on the status that you have an outdated configuration and that you should restart. So let's go ahead and do that. On this page, we are seeing the progress for the restart operation, and we can see that individual restart commands are being issued against the machine, against the roles in the service, and we'll see each of those complete, and then eventually the overall operation will complete. Alright, our restart operation has completed, and we can see that the status at the top has changed and no longer indicates that we have an outdated configuration. Now, perhaps you've made a configuration change at some point in the past. Perhaps it's far enough ago that you may not remember exactly what you did or why you did it. To take a look at the changes that you made previously, you can look at the configuration history, which is accessible by clicking the button here, labeled Configuration History. And this shows us the set of changes that have been made over time and indicates what the current revision is and shows us the history. As you can see here, a wide set of changes have been made in the past, and we can say when those changes occurred and who is the user who made those changes. And if we want to see what actually occurred in a particular change, we can compare the current revision to the past revision. Could be any of the past revisions. And if we click compare, we see that the change that I made was changing the replication factor from 2 to 3. Now, you can see that we have had a health event has occurred, and one of our data nodes has gone bad. And this is the sort of scenario that will be discussed more in our monitoring demo. In a situation where you have multiple users of the system, multiple administrators, it would of course not be very good if there was only a single user account that they all shared. It would then be impossible to tell who made what changes. And so Cloudera Manager 3.7 introduces the concept of multiple users. And if we go and look at the main administration page, we can see there is now a Users tab. And if we click here, we can see the users on the system. In this case, we have a main admin user and we have a guest user. And you'll see that the admin user is unsurprisingly an admin and the guest user is not. So what does that mean? It means that the guest user is able to look at the state of the services, but is not able to change that state. And I'll demonstrate this here. So if I now log in as guest, we'll see that we come back to the service summary, and it looks very similar to the one that we saw before, except the action buttons on the right are missing, because obviously we don't want to allow this user to take any actions. But we can continue to investigate, so we can click through to our HDFS service, and we see a summary, again, very similar to what we had before, but without the actions being available. If we look at the configuration page, we'll see that the save button is missing because we shouldn't be making changes, and we can see that the values are not editable. So the user can happily look through the configuration but not modify it. Similarly, on the instances page, none of the action buttons that we saw before are present. Finally, it's worth mentioning that Cloudera Manager helps you to use Kerberos. Kerberos is a security system which allows you to ensure that you have secure communication within your cluster and secure authentication of your users. So if we go and look at any of our services, certainly HDFS, we can see that it's possible to turn on Kerberos, and in this particular case that is what we've done. And anyone who's tried to set Kerberos up with Hadoop by themselves without the assistance of Cloudera Manager will know that it's a very involved process which can be error prone, and when you do have an error you get error messages that are not very clear. Cloudera Manager makes this a lot simpler. As a quick illustration, you can see here the set of Kerberos credentials that are being managed by Cloudera Manager, and in the absence of it you'd be going through and trying to create and maintain these individual credentials yourself on the various machines. So there's plenty going on there. So in summary, Cloudera Manager 3.7 is the easiest and most effective way to set up, configure, and control your Hadoop services. And once you've used it, you'll never imagine going back. Thanks very much.